Stormy night, and members of the rubber band were stretched around the campfire. And one of them said, "Captain, tell us a story." And this was the story he told. Many, many, many years ago, in a very small town, high upon the central building or the municipal building, way up on its roof, there stood a weather vane. Now, we all know what a weather vane is.
No.
It sticks out of the roof, and it has the indicators that say north, south, east, and west. And above that, there is an arrow, and it pivots on the stem that comes out of the roof. And when the wind blows, it blows against the end of the arrow, and it swivels it around so that it always the arrow points in the direction that the wind is coming from. So if the wind is coming out of the north and the arrow is pointing to the north, the people will say it's a north wind. And people had always come to the municipal building to see which way the wind was blowing. And they always knew that based upon the weather vane, if it was pointing from the north or from the east or halfway in between, which was called a northeasterner or a nor'easterner, that was the way the weather was always judged. They didn't have people that they could listen to the radio and listen to the weatherman. They came to the municipal building and looked at the weather vane because they could tell what kind of weather was going to come about. Well, one summer day, everything had been going very, very well. One summer day, people were kind of restless because it was hot and humid, and it acted like a storm was coming. And sure enough, as the afternoon came on, it got later and later in the day, there wasn't a sound, not a leaf was stirring. It was hot and muggy, and everybody was kind of out of sorts. And then, as the darkness came down and the sun disappeared in the west, there was a mumble of thunder far away. Boom, boom, boom. The people thought, yes, there was going to be a bad storm that night. And sure enough, the sun went down, and it was still hot and oppressive. Not a leaf was stirring, but far away you could hear the thunder roaring, getting closer and closer. And the stars went out because the clouds rolled in. And then, all of a sudden, there was a flash of lightning, and the thunder roared, and the rains came down, and everybody thought, okay, this is great. Now the heat will go away, and everybody will be happy. It was not to be so, because there in the municipal building, Mr. Jones, the clerk, lay in a pool of blood, with the arrow from the weather vane stuck in his heart. He was dead. Morning came, and people found Mr. Jones. And it was scary. What had happened to Mr. Jones in that terrible storm the night before? And people looked on top of the weather vane, and the arrow, sure enough, was gone. Only the pointers, north, east, south, and west, was still up on top of the municipal building. The arrow was sticking in Mr. Jones. He was dead. Well, Sheriff Smith, in his blustery way, said he would solve the mystery of the murder of Mr. Jones. So he started to investigate. And nobody could understand how it had happened. Because the night before, people swore up and down they had seen the weather vane and they had seen the arrow pointing in the direction of the bad storm. Well, pretty soon, people began to forget about what had happened to Mr. Jones, how he had died the night of the bad storm. And so they put a new arrow up on top of the municipal building so that it would swivel around and it would point the direction of the wind. And time went on. Winter came, and spring came, and then another hot summer came along. And sure enough, 1 year from the night that Mr. Jones had died, another bad day and a bad storm came. And the thunder roared, and the lightning flashed, and the rains came down, and the weather vanes swung around. And sure enough, everybody was glad that the storm had come, except for Mary Gracious. Mary Gracious was the secretary to old Mr. Jones, and she lay in a pool of blood in her office with the arrow of the weather vane stuck in her heart. Morning came, and the people found this poor, hapless lady that had a weather vane, the arrow of the weather vane, stuck in her heart. It was terrible, because now 2 murders had taken place, and both of them had the arrow of the weather vane stuck in their heart. Well, the sheriff said, "I will solve this crime." Everybody said that just before the storm, the weather vane was there. They had seen it was pointing out to the northwest where the storm had come, and that the arrow was there. You know, the spire went up, the pointers were there, the ball was there, and then the weather vane and the other ball, just like it had always been. Well, time went on, and people forgot the 2 murders. Winter came, then spring came. Aha, another summer came. And sure enough, 1 year later, 1 year to the day, 2 years to the day from the first murder, 1 year from the second murder, and people were a little frightened because sure enough, the day was hot and muggy, and they were sure a storm would come. The sheriff decided that he would post a guard on top of the municipal building, even if it rained, and they would watch the weather vane. And as it got dark, the thunder began to rumble in the west. It began to get closer and closer and closer. The old sheriff was sitting up on top of the municipal building, and he was watching the weather vane. And the weather vane was swinging back and forth, but it was pointing to the west. And then the thunder roared, and the lightning flashed, and the rain began to come down, and everybody was frightened because they wondered who was going to get murdered again. And the sheriff sat there, and then suddenly a great big eagle flew out of the sky, out of the clouds, out of the rain, and it landed on top of the weather vane, and it clutched in its claws the arrow, and it stuck the arrow right in the sheriff's heart. And as the morning came, the people looked up, and there was the sheriff lying across the top of the roof, dead, with the weather vane arrow stuck in his heart. But there, perched on top of the weather vane, was a great big black eagle, and it had turned to iron. From that time on, every year, right on time, on the anniversary of the first death, a thunderstorm roared through the village. But there were no more murders. Until one time, a lady by the name of Virginia Casson came to this little village, and she bought the weather vane with the black eagle on top of the weather vane. And she brought it to a little cottage, a little house on Lauderdale Lake. And she put it on the front porch. And to this day, that eagle with the arrow in the weather vane sits on the front porch. And that arrow is the very same arrow that murdered the sheriff, the little old lady, and Mr. Jones. That's all.